Wait a minute, so it means that 64% of the insulin production doesn't depend on the quantity of macronutrients you ingest.
Correct. In other words, all what is said about avoiding sugar and fat or avoiding proteins is just hot air. That's why those diets don't work. You've all heard of the glycemia that measures the quantity of sugar in the blood and the glycemic index. The major mistake made was to take for granted that the glucose was the major cause for insulin increase. It is not.
Hi guys, let's carry on our exploration of weight gain mechanisms. We will end up this exploration today with the role of sugar and then give you our recommendations. You will then be able to determine what works better for you. But before we start, if you're not a member of our community yet and you want to get an excellent Living Foods ebook to start your journey to get back to shape, then visit our website www.re-genesis.co.za. You just have to enter your name and your email address and you'll get that complimentary Game Changer ebook. Okay, so let's refresh our memories and review what we've seen in the previous video. First, managing weight is an autonomous process handled by a group of hormones. Among those hormones, we can only have an impact on insulin and cortisol. When the insulin increases, weight increases, and when cortisol increases, so does insulin resistance. And that insulin resistance generates a production of more insulin, which in turn generates weight gain. When you have a production of cortisol, at the beginning, you tend to lose weight, simply because that cortisol burns your body resources and it opposes nutrition by inhibiting digestive secretions, enzymes production, and acids in the stomach. But with chronic levels of cortisol, your level of insulin increases, which in turn generates weight gain. Second, sport is not a key element to lose fat mass. Third, wheel or calorie restrictions are not key factors. And fourth, insulin increase and cortisol increase seem to be the two factors we can have a grip on to balance a weakened metabolism, be it that of an overweight or an underweight person. So Ladislas, what about weight gain and sugar?
Well, we know that what generates an increase of insulin is the production of sugars. Based on this, many weight loss diets focus on removing sugars and fat. The problem with those types of diet is at first they're quite challenging, as sugars is everywhere in our food, so it's difficult not to meet any at some point. And second, we're naturally attracted to sugar. Finally, when you remove sugar and want to avoid fat, what do you have left? Proteins. So you focus on eating more proteins. The problem with that is that proteins acidify the body. They eventually generate inflammations, which leads to more cortisol production, which leads to resistance to insulin, which induces an increase in insulin production. Now, in 1997, researchers found out something important. Till then, it was taken for granted that the quantity of sugar in a food directly induces the quantity of insulin your pancreas produces. In 1997, they found out that sugar intake only accounts for 23% of insulin production. Proteins account for 10% of insulin increase, and fat for 3%.
Wait a minute, so it means that 64% of the insulin production doesn't depend on the quantity of macronutrients you ingest.
Correct. In other words, all what is said about avoiding sugar and fat or avoiding proteins is just hot air. That's why those diets don't work. You've all heard of the glycemia that measures the quantity of sugar in the blood and the glycemic index. The major mistake made was to take for granted that the glucose was the major cause for insulin increase. It is not.
So let's wrap up what we've understood so far on insulin production.
Mm-hmm.
Sugar intake only accounts for 23% in insulin production. Proteins account for 10% of insulin increase, and fats for 3%.
Other factors have been listed over the years. Fibers limit the insulin increase, so the more you have fibers in your macronutrients, the lower the insulin response. The more you go towards plain, raw, and non-processed food, the more you'll get a good quantity of fibers. Fermented and lacto-fermented food is very favorable to cap insulin response. Vinegar contributes to inhibit insulin production.
But it acidifies the body, so don't take too much and find the right balance.
The less processed the food, the less the insulin response. Unfortunately, one of the main character traits of our modern food diet is a very denatured and processed food with little fibers and no fermentation.
So let's zero in on sugar, please.
You may know that nowadays sugar consumption rate is 25 times more than that of the 19th century, with a huge increase since 1980s. In fact, today, by the age of 7, a child has already had more sugar than their granddad in his entire life. Staggering, isn't it? In terms of simple sugars, there are two types, glucose and fructose. Glucose can be used by all the cells of the body. A limited part of it is changed into glycogen. The rest of it requires a production of insulin to store it. Fructose is different. It cannot be used as it is in the cells. It is metabolized in the liver and then changed into glucose, then into lactate, and then into fat, generating a fat liver and overloading this vital organ. Unlike glucose, there is no maximum absorption rate for fructose. Its ability to make us obese is well documented in the light of the metabolic syndrome, a series of physiopathological disorders such as excess of abdominal fat, hypertension, depression, cardiovascular disorders, what else? Cognitive decline, diabetes, and cholesterol. The maximum quantity of glucose we can ingest is limited. That limit doesn't exist for fructose.
So guess which type of sugar our modern food is loaded with. Processed fructose used as additive from sodas to drinks to ready meals, breakfast food, snacks and condiments. As a result, and as you can imagine, insulin kicks in and stores the excess of glucose into glycogen. But storage capacities are small, then into lactate and then into fat.
Insulin will tend to stock the excess of fat into the liver first. But after some time, there is already a lot of fat around the liver and the effect of insulin on that part decreases. The phenomenon is called insulin resistance. Therefore, there will be even more production of insulin, leading eventually to more fat, even at liver level.
So when do these actions happen?
Well, a regular consumption of 70 grams of fructose per day will lead to the harmful effects we've described. That is quite easy to reach with a modern regular food diet, as that sugar is everywhere in processed and refined food that we know, actually, that most people know. Remember, we're talking of processed fructose, usually from concentrated corn syrup, changed into fructose. It is much, much more difficult to reach that point when you eat fruits and vegetables. You'll probably have to eat 40 to 50 bananas to get there. If you're tired after ingesting food, then you're probably in hyperinsulin production mode.
So now, before sharing our suggestions and recommendations, let's wrap this up one last time. So it's not because you eat too much or don't move enough that you put on weight. There is an unconscious, autonomous, and adaptive mechanism inside you. If you eat more, your metabolism will go faster, and if you eat less, it will go slower, and eventually, no matter what your weight, we get back around an average body weight value.
Correct.
Second, sport doesn't work when it comes to lasting weight loss. Practice sport because it is good for your health, not to lose weight.
True.
Third, weight control is not a conscious mechanism. It is independent from your will. Fourth, hormones are the regulators. There is an autonomous hormonal weight control system we have no direct control on, but we can play ball with two of those hormones, cortisol and insulin, to regulate our weight. 5, when insulin is high, you put on weight. When it is low, you don't. That rule is true no matter what, and it is the same with cortisol. 6, the more production of insulin, the more resistance to insulin. There is a production of insulin every time we eat. So the more often we eat, the more we stock. 7, cortisol level depends on stress, sleep, and inflammation. We know that insulin increase is due to sugar by 25%, proteins by 10%, and fat by 3%. It means two things. A, for the same quantity of calories, some food will generate more insulin production than others. B, 64% of insulin increase is not due to the macronutrients you eat. Those 64% responsible for weight gain and obesity are generated by cortisol levels. Cortisol is produced when there is an intense stress, lack of sleep, inflammation in your body, the polluted, toxic, and processed food that we eat, the craziness of our lifestyle, the massive electromagnetic waves bombardment, the pollution, in other words, the aggression to our body. Hence, our environment is a major cause of weight gain. Our nowadays polluted, refined, processed food is a major cause of weight gain. Now, what are your suggestions to bring back our weight to balance?
If you followed us so far, then you know that excess weight and underweight, resistance to insulin, and high level of cortisol are all symptoms of an imbalance in our body. Weight gain and obesity are consequences of the deep alteration of our way of life, including our food diet. That's a fact. With everything we've covered so far, you have everything you need to create your own solution, what works best for you. But if you want to have our solution, I would say there are not one factor to play up with to thwart that tendency to weight gain. There are several factors to play ball with, going from the nature of food to eat, to sleep, to stress reduction, etc. Still, there is one key factor to consider because its action is straight and direct, and that's the chronobiology of food. The more often you eat, the more production of insulin. The less often you eat, the less production of insulin. And there is one key factor to bring this back to normal, and that's fasting, the abstinence of food. When you leave your body at rest, it peacefully comes back to its parameters of normalcy. So, fasting and abstinence of food will be the parameters we'll play up with, but with no food quantity restriction.
Yes, it is not about how much you eat, it is about when you eat and what you eat as well, of course. Considering all this, let's have a look at potential solutions.
Eat less often. The less often you eat, the less insulin you produce, and the more you're going to tap into your fat mass. When you're short fasting, your metabolism goes faster, not slower, and your breathing capacity increases. You're burning more calories and better. The best way to bring back to balance a failing or unbalanced metabolism is through fasting. I'm talking about short fasting here, not long fasting, as the metabolism will slow down after 9 to 10 days. So that's intermittent fasting. And it's the same if you're fasting 24 hours, 2 days, or 3 days.
So we'll soon shoot a series of videos on fasting.
Yeah, shorten your intakes of food in the day. Ideally, if you really want to lose weight, have one meal a day, one big meal. It is not a food restriction. It's not about quantity restriction at all. Remember, you do not want to slow down your metabolism.
You can also decide to have your food intake during a short time slot, say from 5 to 9 p.m. for instance. If you can't do that, have lunch and a dinner. If you have breakfast, you tend to increase your insulin rates and therefore you can't burn your stock of fat. So fasting and physical exercise increase the metabolism. The more often you fast, the more you burn fat.
There is no weight loss strategy without fasting. If you're not used to intermittent fasting, start slowly by not having your breakfast at 7 or 8 a.m. as usual. And little by little, start pushing to 10 a.m., then 11 a.m. or noon. You'll realize that you're fine. And slowly, step by step, you'll push it to one big meal in the evening. Now you're going to tell me that heavy meal and digestion in the evening are not compatible. Well, if you've saved your body from digesting the rest of your day, your enzymes will work even stronger. Plus, in the evening, your system tends to switch to the parasympathetic nervous system that directly rules digestion. So it's actually a perfect timing. There are other little factors we can play up with, such as lactofermentation. Studies show that consumption of lactofermented products reduce insulin resistance and leptin resistance. Leptin is a hormone produced by the cells to say to the brain that they are full of fat and they can't take no more. For the people suffering from obesity, there is tendency to leptin resistance. The brain doesn't receive the message. With lactofermentation, the body will produce less insulin and less leptin. Lactofermentation is also a great way to bring specific bacteria into the intestines. Bring back your metabolism up to speed. Have a dense food diet rather than a watery one. We're talking here about a living food diet. It means a lot of minerals, fat, and less watery fruits. You can also add quinton plasma, which is seawater.
Yeah, we'll shoot a video on the incredible benefits of quinton plasma.
Decrease stress, sleep enough, spend time outside under the sun. For food, what makes you obese is the association between sugars, refined sugars, fatty acids, stress, and inflammation. This is exactly some of the character traits of our modern life, and this is the exact recipe for obesity. Talking about sugars, fruits and vegetables have never been connected to weight gain or insulin resistance. It doesn't mean that you should eat colossal quantities. Add some vegetable juices from a slow cold press juicer to your diet, and you'll see a change to your weight. They bring micronutrients, which is necessary to fend off inflammation.
Thank you, Ladis. I hope you've understood that you need to bring a proper change to your lifestyle. If you need to remember one thing to this series of chat is that several factors are involved in weight gain and that your weight loss strategy should encompass not one but several dimensions. Yet, remember that fasting is the most efficient way to bring back a balance within your hormonal system. If you've enjoyed this video, or if you know someone who could benefit from it, just make their day by being the person who will add value to their life by sharing this video with them.
Mm-hmm. So, what are you going to do with what you've learned today? Put it into practice. If you're overweight, start by avoiding breakfast to only have lunch and dinner. Reduce stress and sleep more. That way, you'll start having a great impact on your weight.
Finally, you can follow the link to our website below this video to download our complimentary Living Foods ebook that will 100% contribute to maximize your nutrient intake. And that way you will also be the first one to know when our health programs are ready. Take good care of yourself. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.